You lift an ordinary loaf from the shelf and check the price twice. In May 2026, the national average for white pan bread was $1.83 per pound. About 3½ pounds comes to roughly $6.41 as a weight-only comparison. That national average is not your shelf price. The claim on my bench is a United States Department of Agriculture bread formula revised in December 1931. It printed a qualified yield of about 3½ pounds. It did not print a family size or a 40-cent complete batch price. The surviving price table also leaves salt and yeast unpriced. So today we will measure the formula, the old table, and the modern comparison before we trust the story. Near the end, I will put all three on the same bench. You will see what survived, what failed, and exactly where guessing has to stop. Down in my workshop, I pull open the top drawer and set the worn green ledger under the lamp. Its cloth cover and pencil columns belong to Walt's storytelling world. They are not authenticated historical evidence. The document I place beside it is real and public. It is Home Baking, Farmers Bulletin number 1450, issued by the United States Department of Agriculture. Charlotte Chatfield is credited as the author and identified as an Associate Home Economics Specialist in the Bureau of Home Economics. The bulletin was first issued in August 1925, and this verified edition was revised in December 1931. Those dates tell us when the government published the guidance. They do not prove that every household used this exact formula. A separate United States Department of Agriculture radio script from May 1933 discussed home bread making as part of economical housekeeping. That broadcast is period context, while the exact formula in this entry comes from Farmers Bulletin 1450. Publication is evidence of availability, not a census of kitchens. That distinction may sound small, but it is the difference between history and folklore. My father wrote numbers in a family ledger in the story I tell here. The federal scan carries the historical weight. By the end of this video, you will have the proportions, the historical sequence, the surviving price arithmetic, and the modern safety handoff. You will also know why the words about 3½ pounds matter more than the 40-cent legend. I spent 40 years as a machinist, and I still distrust a measurement that arrives without its tolerances. For years, my father's green ledger stayed in that top drawer while I trusted easier answers. That was my bad entry. A shaft marked 1 inch is not useful until you know how close it must be. Bread is softer work, though the same habit helps. The bulletin says its listed proportions make about 3½ pounds of bread. That word about is part of the measurement and stays with it. The formula calls for about 2¼ pounds of sifted hard wheat flour, also printed as about 2¼ quarts. It gives 2¾ cups of liquid, 4 teaspoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and 2 tablespoons of fat. The liquid could be milk, water, potato water, or a combination of those choices. All measurements were to be level. The historical straight dough passage lists 1 ounce of compressed yeast, which the bulletin also calls 2 cakes. That wording does not authorize 1 ounce of modern active dry or instant yeast. For a present-day bake, use a tested current recipe and the yeast maker's conversion. Here is the tolerance that makes this more than a neat list. The bulletin says the exact flour quantity could not always be known in advance. Its printed quantity was about right for rather strong flour, while flour of average strength could require more. It also said water could require more flour than milk. so 2¼ pounds is a nominal historical quantity, not a guaranteed modern batch input. That is the first useful lesson from the bench. Good household arithmetic keeps the uncertainty attached to the number. Farmers Bulletin 1450 names 2 standard ways to make the bread, straight dough, and sponge. We are following the historical straight dough description because that is where the compressed yeast sequence is printed. At about 82 degrees Fahrenheit, the bulletin said the straight dough process took about 4 hours from mixing until the loaves entered the oven. For fermentation, it favored roughly 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. If milk was chosen, the 1931 method scalded it and cooled it before mixing. The liquid mixture was brought below 100 degrees before meeting the yeast. Then came mixing and kneading, followed by a first rise. After that first rise, the historical instruction called for punching the dough down. A second rise came before dividing, then the dough was molded and allowed to rise in the pans. The pan rise was kept around 80 to 85 degrees. The bulletin warned against judging dough by elapsed time alone. During the historical pan rise, the loaves were tested with a finger when they had about doubled in bulk. In plain shop language, the clock was one gauge among several. The oven setting was about 400 to 415 degrees Fahrenheit. For a coal or wood range, the historical starting temperature was 400 degrees or lower. The starting setting depended on loaf size, and a 1-pound loaf was described as baking hotter and faster than a 1½ pound loaf. If an oven baked unevenly, the historical instruction was to turn the loaves after about 20 minutes, then the temperature could be lowered. Its historical baking range was 45 minutes to 1 hour, depending on oven temperature and loaf size. Shrinking from the pan sides and a hollow sound when tapped were 2 period doneness cues. The bulletin then said to remove the bread from the pans, cool it on a rack, and leave it uncovered while warm. This is a historical process description, not a universal modern safety recipe. I am giving you its sequence so you can understand the document, not asking you to improvise with old yeast forms and old oven cues. A complete-sounding claim can crowd out an incomplete record. The family of 6 and 40-cent version joins 2 details the sources do not join. I found no evidence showing who created that story or why it spread. What survives is less dramatic and more useful. A 1931 United States Department of Agriculture formula, and a national table of selected food prices. It reports selected food prices in United States cities, with figures stated in cents per the listed unit. For 1931, flour is 18 cents for 6 pounds, white bread is 7.7 cents per pound, and delivered milk is 26.2 cents per half gallon. Margarine is 19.9 cents per pound, while sugar is 28 cents for 5 pounds. The flour price is only a proxy because that series covers general all-purpose white flour, while the bulletin specifies sifted hard wheat flour. The formula says fat, so choosing margarine for arithmetic is a hypothetical costing choice. The table supplies no salt price and no yeast price for this reconstruction. It also cannot tell us one household's fuel, labor, equipment, waste, or extra flour. That is how knowledge gets buried in this case. The incomplete evidence is replaced by a complete-sounding price. It is not a magic poverty loaf, but a process control formula. The faceless villain is our appetite for a number with no loose ends. The repair is slower and dignified. We reopen the table, keep every missing item visible, and refuse to rent certainty from a slogan. If you're thinking missing prices make this ledger useless, stay with me. the evidence still shows where honest arithmetic ends. Take the 1931 flour figure first. 18 cents for 6 pounds equals 3 cents per pound. Applying that to the nominal 2 1/4 pound quantity gives 6.75 cents, using a non-matching flour price proxy and allowing that actual flour use could differ. For the fat estimate only, treating 2 tablespoons as 1 ounce and choosing margarine gives about 1.24 cents. For the sugar estimate only, treating 2 tablespoons as about 25 grams gives about 0.31 cents at the historical price. Those 3 priced pieces total about 8.3 cents before salt, compressed yeast, oven fuel, labor, equipment, waste, or additional flour. If we add the reconstructed delivered milk portion, the partial figure becomes about 17.31 cents, still carrying every proxy, assumption, and exclusion. At the bulletin's approximate yield, about 3 1/2 pounds of purchased white bread comes to about 26.95 cents by weight in that table. The arithmetic gaps are about 18.65 cents and 9.64 cents. Yet neither is household savings because the ingredient subtotals are incomplete and proxy-based. Here is the honesty beat in plain words. The source never says the formula fed a family of 6. The source never gives a 40-cent complete batch price. The table leaves salt and compressed yeast unpriced, and it says nothing about fuel or labor. If your flour, liquid, oven, local price, or available time differs, this reconstruction does not predict your result. That was the historical method. Today, current guidance says most flour is raw and has usually not been treated to kill germs that can cause food poisoning. Do not taste raw flour, dough, or batter, and do not let children play with ordinary raw flour dough. Cooking or baking is the step that kills bacteria that may be in flour. For a modern bake, follow a tested current recipe's oven temperature and baking time. The old 400-degree figure is an oven setting rather than the loaf's internal temperature, and the old 45-minute to 1-hour range is no universal safety guarantee. After handling raw flour or dough, wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Wash bowls, utensils, and countertops that touched it with hot, soapy water, and keep raw flour away from ready-to-eat food. This formula contains wheat, one of the 9 major food allergens, and the milk option adds another major allergen. The water option still contains wheat, and it proves nothing about the fat, yeast, labels, or cross-contact. If bread shows visible mold, discard it instead of cutting away one spot, because porous bread can be contaminated below the surface. Foodkeeper's separate record for homemade whole wheat bread lists 3 to 5 pantry days and 3 freezer months as product-specific quality guidance. Those numbers do not directly govern this historical hard wheat formula. For a freezer, current guidance says 0 degrees Fahrenheit or below, and recommended freezer times mainly address quality. The safe household method is simple. Use the old bulletin to understand history, then use a tested present-day recipe, current ingredient labels, and current food safety guidance for what you actually bake. If you want the worksheets I use to turn household questions into weekly action, the Depression Household System is linked below. At grandpasledger.com, the live offer is 74 printable pages, 30 food-stretching recipes, 52 Saturday actions, and reusable household worksheets. It is $17 once, with no subscription, and the page says, "Protected digital access is available immediately after payment." The original 1931 United States Department of Agriculture Bulletin is free in the public archive. The paid household system is separate from that free public document. Now stay right here, because what comes next is the entry I built this whole video around. Turn to printed page 4 of Home Baking, Farmers Bulletin number 1450. The first word that matters is about. The page says the proportions make about 3 1/2 pounds of bread. Then printed page 5 tightens the lesson. It says the exact flour quantity cannot always be known in advance, that the printed amount was about right for rather strong flour, and that water could require more flour than milk. Now set those pages beside the 1931 price table. The table prices flour, bread, milk, margarine, and sugar, while giving us no salt price and no yeast price for this reconstruction. The bulletin names fat without naming margarine. The price series names all-purpose white flour, while the formula names sifted hard wheat flour. The strongest line in the archive is the blank it forces us to keep. We can reconstruct a partial ledger. We cannot honestly reconstruct an exact 40-cent complete batch. A formula is ingredients joined to observation, temperature, sequence, and judgment. Now bring the household ledger forward to May 2026. The national average for white all-purpose flour was 54.4 cents per pound. Using 2 1/4 pounds only as a nominal illustration, the flour comes to about $1.22 before every other batch cost. White pan bread averaged $1.83 per pound, so about 3 1/2 pounds becomes roughly $6.41 as a weight-only comparison. In April 2026, the national residential electricity average was 18.83 cents per kilowatt hour. I cannot price your oven cycle without knowing how many kilowatt hours your appliance and bake actually use. National averages are no substitute for your store receipt, utility rate, time, equipment, or household priorities. The archive gives us the historical formula for free. Your own measured entries decide whether baking fits your house now. That is more modest than a 40-cent miracle and far more useful. I close the green ledger with 2 numbers left on the bench. The first is about 3 1/2 pounds, the qualified yield printed by the United States Department of Agriculture in the edition revised in 1931. The second is 40 cents, the complete batch price the surviving evidence cannot establish. There is dignity in leaving a blank where the record leaves a blank. You do not need folklore to make a capable decision. You need the source, your local prices, your actual oven use, and enough patience to keep unlike numbers apart. That feeling is quiet satisfaction, the kind a machinist gets when the final measurement agrees with the drawing. For one tiny favor, write the price of 1 pound of bread where you live. Just the price and your state. I read every one, and it will show us which shelf tag deserves a later ledger test. Next Saturday, I open a United States Department of Agriculture washing machine sheet dated September 24, 1937. It warned that filling above the marked water line could noticeably impair the washer. It historically advised leaving the lid open 1 or 2 inches between wash days. That instruction belongs to 1937, not every modern machine. The sheet gives no maintenance item price, so it supports no penny trick. For a modern washer, follow the exact model manual, disconnect power before any permitted servicing, and send anything beyond its included owner procedures to qualified personnel. The family ledger is open again, 1 entry at a time. Subscribe if you want to help recover the next one with the sources open and the guesses marked honestly.